I want to get to this issue of impeachment. What is impeachment? Why is impeachment important? But it can be abused, too. Why did the framers of the Constitution put impeachment in the Constitution? And it was among the subjects that was debated the longest: impeachment, the Electoral College, and a few other issues. But impeachment in particular, there was great debate over whether there should be impeachment. Almost unanimously, they agreed there should be, even though they knew they were setting up a system with different election cycles for presidents and vice presidents and other public officials. But what if there's a problem between the election cycles, or before there's an election, right before there's an election? And so they didn't want to give Congress the power to constantly remove a president of the United States, so it had to be a serious matter. They didn't have what we would call today this federal criminal code with all these offenses in it. And they thought, regardless of certain types of individual crimes, they did have crimes, of course, that they would punish at the time. It has to be bigger than that, because the President of the United States is elected effectively through the Electoral College, but by all the people. So there has to be a reason to remove somebody like this. And they looked very much at English history, the impeachment of a man named Hastings in Britain. They debated the British language that they were using for impeachment. They agreed with some of it. They disagreed with some of it. And they came up with the phrase that we now have in the Constitution: treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. Now, when you think of misdemeanors, maybe you're thinking of parading or trespassing or jaywalking. That's not what they meant by that. Or high crimes, maybe you're thinking of a criminal felony. That's not what they meant by it. Or treason, they meant what you thought and think treason is. Bribery, yes, they were particularly concerned about what? Foreign bribes. In fact, they were having issues with foreign governments trying to bribe public officials prior to the adoption of the Constitution. So they were thinking about this, and that was on their mind. So it's treason, bribery, pretty much understandable, high crimes and misdemeanors, and this is where the debate comes down. So I have spent, you're not going to believe this, since I was in my teens, a lifetime researching this issue of impeachment. Why? Because the impeachment inquiry and articles drawn up against Richard Nixon had piqued my interest. At the time, I read whatever scholarship I get my hands on, and I still do that today. And there's not a ton, but there is a good amount. You have a lot of professors who, like typical law professors, are promoting their opinion as text, but that's not accurate. So you need to have the ability to separate that from really what the framers were trying to do. Among other places you can look is Federalist 65, where Hamilton discusses it at some length. There's not enormous amount of specificity. And that's an interesting word, specificity. They purposely didn't want it to be overly specific because they couldn't contemplate every possible situation in which there should be an impeachment inquiry and potential removal of a president, among others. But they wanted it to be specific enough where simply a disagreement between the parties or the branches of government didn't serve as a purpose to have an impeachment trial and a removal of a president. Otherwise, you wouldn't really have three branches of government, and a president could be blackmailed by the legislature, that is Congress. So they were very aware of that. And these debates went on, and they went on at some length. So they adopted this phrase, high crimes, misdemeanors, and of course, bribery and treason. And most of that came out of English law, but not all of it. English law also had a provision for maladministration. George Mason, during the Constitutional Convention, liked that. He said there ought to be a provision for maladministration. James Madison argued no, because that is way too nebulous. And so if you have political differences and purely political differences and dress them up as maladministration, there'd be no end to this. So there was a great debate over that. And Madison won out, the father of our Constitution, as he's called. And we also see that in Madison's notes. And I have before me a nice compilation by the Congressional Research Service. This is very important. I know I get into this scholarly stuff and this intellectual stuff and this Booker stuff, but it's very, very important for understanding your country that we understand the real history and the real purpose of these phrases in the Constitution. And at CRS, they write, while evidence of precisely what conduct the framers and ratifiers of the Constitution considered to constitute high crimes and misdemeanors is relatively sparse, the evidence available indicates that they considered impeachment to be an essential tool to hold government officers accountable for political crimes or offenses against the state. James Madison considered it indispensable, and I'm quoting Madison, that some provision be made for defending the community against incapacity, negligence, or perfidy of the chief executive, quote unquote. As the president might, quote, he wrote, pervert his administration into a scheme of peculation or oppression, unquote, or, quote, betray his trust to foreign powers, unquote. Alexander Hamilton, in explaining the Constitution's impeachment provision in Federalist 65, described impeachable offenses as arising from, quote, the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust, unquote. Such offenses, said Hamilton, were, quote, political, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. These political offenses could take innumerable forms and simply could not be neatly delineated, said Hamilton. In other words, it's like what Associate Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart once said about pornography. I can't really define it, but I know it when I see it, he wrote. Justice Joseph Story, considered one of the great intellectuals and scholars on the Constitution, as well as a justice, writing on the Constitution, echoed the understanding that impeachment applied to political offenses. He noted that impeachment applied to those, quote, offenses committed by public men in violation of their public trust and duties that are often political. And like Hamilton, Story considered the range of impeachable offenses, quote, so various in their character and so indefinable in their actual involution that it is almost impossible to provide systematically for them by positive law, that is, sort of statutory affirmative law. So what do we make of all this? Well, there's a balancing act. You don't impeach presidents on small and light accusations. On the other hand, you don't have to wait for a president to commit mass murder. So let's take a look at this in the context of Joe Biden. Let's start with the Constitution. That is, has he violated the Constitution itself? That would clearly fit within the impeachment clause of the Constitution as acts against the public. Well, of course he has. He has an obligation to uphold the law under the Constitution, whether he agrees with the law or not. That's been litigated over the decades. So a president is required to enforce, especially a clear law, whether he or she likes it or not. They take an oath to uphold the Constitution, to uphold the law, and if they fail to do that, then they violated their oath and they have violated the Constitution. The impeachment clause kicks in. So we have all these laws dealing with immigration to secure the country, to protect the people, to determine how people come here, who comes here, under what circumstances they come here. Joe Biden has blown out every single one of those immigration laws. And you see the consequences, the inhumane consequences on the border. Let's put that aside, as difficult as that is. Has Joe Biden upheld federal immigration law? No. Has Joe Biden violated federal immigration law? Yes. Did he do it by accident? Did he do it on occasion? No. He has destroyed the federal immigration system. That would be a basis for an impeachment article to be considered for impeachment and to be considered, should he be impeached, for a trial to remove him from office. This is in essence a political crime, or a constitutional crime, if you will, against the body politic. Exactly why the Constitution has an impeachment clause. What else? Well, what about his effort, and more than effort, the fact of his circumventing a Supreme Court decision that says under separation of powers, Mr. Biden, as president, you don't have the authority to forgive student loans to the tune of maybe $1 trillion, but certainly hundreds of billions of dollars. That clearly undermines Congress's power under the Constitution. They make the determination on spending, borrowing, taxing. They make the determination on whether to forgive loans and so forth because of their financial impact on the country. Joe Biden has circumvented that ruling by the Supreme Court, and intentionally so, under some cockamamie argument that they have made. So is that an impeachable offense? Defying a Supreme Court order, and more than that, defying Congress and its authority, undermining it completely and seizing that authority for yourself in violation of separation of powers? Of course, that should be an article that should be considered as an impeachable offense. That is a political crime or a constitutional crime against the body politic, against the very structure of the Constitution. There are other areas in which Biden has done this as well. So it's not a one-off, which is bad enough. There is a pattern of defying, violating the Constitution, of seizing power from another branch that he doesn't have, and of refusing to faithfully uphold federal law and the Constitution. This falls within the four corners of the impeachment clause as understood, as written. All these other matters involving finances that the House Oversight Committee is having, and whether or not there were payoffs, the amount of money coming into his family and so forth and so on, of course those are impeachable offenses. It doesn't matter if Joe Biden got $1 or not. When you're setting up a situation in which you want to investigate this from an impeachment perspective, what matters is he committed political, that is, constitutional crimes against the body politic. His family had introductions to enemy states and some allies, to front corporations, from which his family benefited to the tune of anywhere from $30 million to $50 million. They were all selling his name. They were all using his influence. He was involved in scores of phone calls, which he says did not involve him. He didn't really know what was going on. He just said hello. He was involved in meetings where he claims, or his son does, or the lawyers do, he had no knowledge. His staff and the vice president's staff had numerous meetings and contacts with Hunter Biden's partners and their staff. He took multiple trips with Joe Biden on Air Force Two for introductions that he received. In other words, he got the benefit of being the son of this father. Now, you may want to believe, Democrats and the media, they may want to believe that this is all coincidental, this all means nothing. You don't have to even prove a crime here. What I'm saying is the way Joe Biden conducted himself and the way he's involved in a cover-up right now with the help of the Department of Justice, this is a political or a criminal crime against the body politic. There's simply no question that it not only is worthy of an impeachment inquiry, in my view, it's worthy of an impeachment trial at this point.
Want to see more Mark Levin? Go to levintv.com and subscribe now.